Death isn't always the end, at least when it comes to video games. There's usually always a new life where you can redo old mistakes, but that said, sometimes death itself opens new opportunities. And by opportunities, we also mean secret endings. These endings are usually more on the bad side of things, to be honest, but the interesting thing about them is that instead of the typical game over screen, they treat you to a unique cutscene for getting yourself killed in a specific fashion. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 secret video game endings unlocked by dying. Number 10, Ultimate Sacrifice, Dragon Age Origins. Dragon Age Origins' story is a pretty darn harsh experience. You have to make a ton of sacrifices end to end if you want to save Thetis, and this includes sacrifices in the game's finale. Without spoiling too much, in the final defense against the Blight, the Grey Wardens need to sacrifice one of their own in order to absorb the soul of the archdemon that controls the Darkspawn Horde. The choice of who takes the fall is up to you, and there's even a way to save everyone, but if you do choose to play the role of a tragic hero yourself, there's an interesting twist at the end. Instead of going straight to the credits after your sacrifice, the game will actually allow you to play through the celebration party epilogue like you do in all the other endings. However, because of course your character is dead, when you experience this epilogue, you do so through the perspective of one of your living companions. The game only has a couple scenes where you get to control your companions, so it's a pretty unique experience. Not only that, you also get to hear what your other companions have to say about you and your noble sacrifice, so it's definitely worth doing at least once. Number 9, the powerful ending, the Stanley Parable. The Stanley Parable is not one of those games that has high stakes. You can't really mess up and get yourself killed, and even though there are some death endings, the game usually goes out of its way to make sure you're not putting yourself in danger. Except in the powerful ending, the rare instance in the Stanley Parable where your character can actually die. To get the ending, you simply need to jump off the cargo lift in the warehouse area. This will prompt a fade to black screen, and then the game's narrator will sarcastically congratulate you for going so far so as to off yourself just so you could prove you were in charge of your own story. Again, this is the only ending that actually counts as the player's death, although there is one variant of this ending where you're holding a bucket. In this case, instead of acting snarky, the narrator will comment that your suicide was caused by your fear of being separated from your precious bucket. Either way, the game kills you off and you have to start back from the beginning. But hey, at least you made your point, right? No one gets to tell you what to do, even if it means killing yourself or staying attached to your bucket buddy. Either way, both. Number 8, Netherese Explosion, Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 is an incredibly long game that can take an average of 80 hours to finish on your first playthrough. Luckily, if you don't have the time, you can cut this number in half with a secret suicide ending. The ending involves your party's wizard Gale and the Netherese orb stuck in his chest, which is basically the equivalent of a magical fantasy nuke. In Act 2, Gale's goddess and ex-girlfriend Mystra basically tells him to use the orb to sacrifice himself to take out the game's baddies and basically save the world. It's easy to dismiss Mystra's demand as an instant game over, and while you're not wrong, there is actually a secret ending for turning Gale into a human bomb. To do this, you have to use the orb in the chamber where you meet all of the absolutes chosen for the first time. This will play a special cutscene where Gale channels his power, and before the confused cultists can do anything, a city-sized explosion consumes them all, along with you, of course. I absolutely did this ending personally because I was like, well, I know I can explode myself and all the bad guys are gathered in one room, so let's save and go. And it's fantastic. You actually get a credits roll. And then the narrator says, well, that is the ending, but maybe you could keep going and find a better one if you want to. It's very cool. Number 7, Death Ending. You only live once. You Only Live Once is an old Flash game with a unique twist. You only get one life to beat it, and if at any point you die, you won't be able to play it ever again. Because of this, many people's experience with the game ends on the death screen, but what they might not realize is that that's actually only the beginning. Every time you refresh the browser tab, the game over screen secretly changes, gradually telling the story of your character's death. The scenes are all based on the way your character died, so if you were killed by a mob, you might see their arrest, whereas if you died to spikes, you'll see how the entire society puts a ban on them in disgust. To get the whole experience, you have to refresh your death screen several times and then wipe your browser's history so you can play it again and die to a different obstacle. The endings are all worth the effort as they're all unique and utterly hilarious, poking fun at the many tropes of classic platformer games. You Only Live Once is honestly one of those rare situations where dying is actually sort of more fun than beating the game. Number 6, you failed. One Chance. One Chance is another browser-based flash game that, as you could probably guess from the title, also only gives you one shot at playing it. In the game, you play as a scientist trying to develop a cure for a virus that's going to kill all life on the planet within a week. You have only 6 days to do your job, and depending on the choices you make, you can either save the world or doom everyone. However, there's also a secret suicide ending that can happen if you don't take care of your other duties along the way. Aside from your work in the lab, the game also has you make choices regarding your family as well as your co-worker Jim. If you miss at least one day of work to spend more time with your wife and daughter, the angry Jim will come to your house to kill them on day 5. The murder will completely break your character, and the following day he'll commit suicide, triggering the most depressing ending where you purposefully doom everyone to die with you. Geez, Jim, I know we're supposed to be at work, but everything's getting a bit dire. We just want to spend one day with our family. Feel like it's a bit of an overreact. Number 5, Kamsky ending, Detroit Become Human. Detroit Become Human tells a story based off your own choices and failures. Whether you manage to succeed or fail or a bit of both, there are always consequences that come with your actions, and sometimes these can be lethal. As with many Quantic Dream games, each of the main characters can die within a single playthrough, and if you manage to get them all killed pretty early on, this actually comes with a secret ending. It's a bad ending, unsurprisingly. With Marcus's death, the android revolution fails, and because Connor dies before he can finish his investigation, no one knows what caused it. Because of this, Kamsky, the creator of the androids, comes back from his retirement and re-establishes himself as the CEO of CyberLife. The game shows an interview with him in which he addresses the mass decommission of his company's androids and says he plans to create a new, safe line of machine helpers in the future. The game never says this explicitly, but it's alluded to that Kamsky is responsible for turning the androids deviant, and his words in the interview suggest he's likely going to start another rebellion, given that his previous pet project has failed catastrophically. Yep, that's right, your personal tragedy is really just a little minor setback for him. Number 4, Lavos destroys the world, Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is a classic JRPG that's mostly famous for its very clever use of time travel as a game mechanic. The game features multiple endings related to the different ways in which you can change the timeline, but what most people don't realize is there's a secret ending awarded to those who don't mess with time travel at all. Chrono Trigger's main story revolves around the main character's efforts to defeat Lavos, the gargantuan invader from outer space that's destined to destroy the world. Because it's impossible to beat him at the start of the game because he's way too tough and you're way too weak, that is, unless we're talking New Game Plus, basically you have to use time travel if you want to beat him. But if you don't feel like messing with any time paradoxes, you can simply face your fate and die valiantly trying to win an unwinnable fight. The death of your party will trigger the game's bad ending, where Lavos destroys the world. And while, of course, that's definitely a horrible conclusion to the story, at least you let the world's fate play out exactly as it was intended. Which is a good thing? Maybe? Number 3, the Hackett's Quarry Massacre, the Quarry. Most supermassive games allow you to kill everyone in your team as survivors, but this rarely has a major impact on the ending. The games typically skip past everyone's dialogue at the end in these scenarios, and aside from that, there isn't actually any change that's happening. The exception here is the Quarry. Remember that horrible epilogue podcast sequence at the end of the Quarry? If you did reach the end, you're very, very unlikely to have been what must be 3 people who thought that was a good idea or enjoyed it, it, because that's exactly what you want to do at the end of trying to keep a bunch of people alive, is listening to painful podcasters talk about it. And while it was definitely more cringe-inducing than any of the gruesome deaths you experienced up until that point, or any of your failures for that matter, it actually is incredibly customized as far as their endings for their games go. The podcasters actually address a lot of different things in their poorly researched episode on the events of the game, and one of those things is the ending where everyone dies. If you manage to get the campers killed, the podcasters talk about it and start speculating on what might have happened, coming up with their own conspiracy theories. They even give this particular scenario a unique name, the Hackett's Quarry Massacre. It might not be presented in the best possible way, or any way that isn't the worst way. God, I have a bone to pick with that freaking podcast thing. But at least you have to give credit that they certainly were trying to do something interesting with your catastrophic failure if you did manage to get everybody killed. Number 2, Suicide Mission, Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2's finale is possibly the most intense in the entire series. It's a suicide mission where, at every step of the way, you need to make crucial decisions that determine your and your squad's fate. You can make all the right decisions too, or, of course, you can make all the wrong decisions. And in making all the wrong decisions, not only can you get all of your companions killed, you can even get Shepard killed. So, you don't do that whole heroic return thing. In order to kill everyone, you need to not purchase any upgrades for your ship and have low loyalty with all the characters you put in charge of the different tasks during the mission. This makes everyone completely incompetent at their job and causes all the squad members to drop like flies until Shepard is the last soldier standing. In a last-ditch effort to escape the Collector's ship, Shepard will try to jump towards Normandy, but because their squad isn't there to help them, the attempt fails catastrophically. Shepard dies and a secret cutscene plays out where Joker informs the Elusive Man about the failure of your operation. It's an absolutely bleak ending, but to be honest, you only have yourself to blame for not taking the time to work on your squad's teamwork skills. Also, chances are if you did end up with this ending, you probably did it on purpose. Otherwise, oh my goodness. Number 1, mackerel poisoning, Nier Automata. Nier Automata, as you probably know by now, has so many freaking endings that it may as well just be a bundle of secret endings with like a bit of game attached to it. There are a total of 26 different endings in the game, and some of them require the death of your character in order to be achieved. Out of these endings, the most hilarious one is arguably Ending K, also known as the Secret Mackerel Death. In Nier's world, mackerels are infamous among androids for being incredibly poisonous. However, if you're not one to follow warnings or instructions from anybody about what may or may not be lethal to you, then you can acquire one from Acast and decide you're going to take it upon yourself to see if these things are as dangerous as everyone says. As soon as you do, you'll realize the rumors were true, as the game will fade to black and prompt a secret joke ending describing how the fish's poison slowly disabled your character's motor functions before killing them. Funnily enough, according to the description, the death was totally worth it to your character, as right before they died, they think about how good the mackerel tastes and how they've realized why people used to consume them. At least they got a good last meal.